I invited my neighbor into my house, and I felt trapped in my own body. I was in the garden, my little sanctuary, when it happened. The sun started its descent beyond the horizon. Enveloping the flowers I had devoted countless hours to nurturing in a gentle, amber glow, the delicate aroma of lavender intertwined with the rich scent of earth. While the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze created a soothing melody, as if nature itself were singing a lullaby. In that moment, a serene tranquility enveloped me. A stillness that seemed to be mine alone. And then, there he appeared, my neighbor, Tom. I didn't know him intimately, yet we had shared polite greetings throughout the years. He resided right next door, yet our paths rarely intersected. His house always seemed a bit distant, quiet, yet here he was, standing at the edge of my garden. As if he had been wandering by, and was suddenly captivated by it all. "Sorry, didn't mean to intrude," he said, his voice warm but tinged with a hint of awkwardness. As if he wasn't quite sure how to handle the moment. I glanced up, surprised but not bothered. I had caught sight of him several times through the window, a brief glimpse of him tending to his garden. Or occasionally sitting on his porch, absorbed in contemplation. However, I never really focused on him, aside from the rare smile shared when we waved from a distance, completely unintrusive. I remarked, my tone more buoyant than I meant, as if I were inviting him rather than taken aback by his arrival. "It's a lovely evening, isn't it?" Tom nodded. Stepping closer but still hesitating at the border between his lawn and my garden, as though unsure whether to cross that invisible line that separated us. The late afternoon sun enveloped his face in a warm golden glow, and for the first time, I paused to truly observe him. His face bore a kind expression, shaped by the passage of time. Yet still resilient in its contours, with deep laugh lines framing his eyes and strands of gray beginning to appear at his temples. He wasn't handsome in the way younger men are. But there was something about him that made me pause, made me wonder. "I didn't mean to stare at your roses," he said, almost sheepishly. His hand reaching out as if to touch one of the petals, but pulling back as soon as he realized it might be a breach of some unspoken boundary. "It's fine," I reassured him, noticing his hesitation. "They are intended to be appreciated." He let out a quiet chuckle, and I noticed the tension in his shoulders ease away. We lingered in that space for a few moments. Each of us uncertain about what would unfold next. The distant hum of traffic reached my ears, while the chirping of crickets began to swell as twilight enveloped the scene. The air was becoming cooler, and I felt an undeniable pull towards the tranquility of the moment. I should have uttered something to shatter the silence, a light remark to ease his discomfort. To guide the conversation in a different direction, yet I remained silent. Instead, my gaze lingered on him, and I sensed a subtle bond forming between us. Perhaps it was the rawness of the moment. The way the waning light of day enveloped us, or maybe it was simply how time appeared to stretch when our eyes met. "I've never seen you out here before," yet I said at last. A little embarrassed by how much more pointed the observation sounded when it left my lips than I had intended. Tom smiled, but there was something wistful about it. "I have experience a lot. I'm not really into socializing or mingling with the neighbors, I suppose." I found myself uncertain whether it was a cue to delve deeper, yet it seemed like the right time to reveal something more. Something genuine. I comprehend. I'm not particularly outgoing either. This garden serves as my sanctuary. I embrace the solitude. He nodded, his gaze absorbing the lines of flowers. The precisely trimmed hedges, the narrow path meandering through the lush greenery. His gaze held a subtle appreciation, and for some reason, it made me feel acknowledged in a way I hadn't known I longed for. "A stunning location you have here," he remarked, as if voicing the reality of it somehow rendered it more tangible. Prompting me to smile and take a step forward, the distance that had appeared to expand endlessly now felt reduced, more welcoming. "Well, thank you," I replied, my voice soft. "Would you care to step inside? I have some tea brewing, and I'm not certain how you feel, but the evening beckons for something cozy." There was a brief silence. And I couldn't tell if he was taken off guard by my invitation, or if he was weighing the pros and cons in his mind. But the moment lingered, and I sensed a change in the air. A gentle tug that urged me to follow my instincts. "If you don't mind," he inquired, his voice tinged with uncertainty, yet a spark of curiosity lingered. I simply shook my head, not in the slightest. Thus in silence, we both moved away from the edge of the garden. He trailed behind me up the stone steps to the front door, his footsteps soft yet unmistakable. In that brief instant, my heart felt as though it was racing in a manner I had not anticipated. It wasn't fear or anxiety, but something else, something new and strange, like the beginning of an untold story. As I opened the door, the aroma of fresh-baked bread welcomed us, warm and inviting. The warm illumination of the lamp bathed the corridor, creating delicate silhouettes on the surfaces around. The house was quieter than usual, yet within that stillness lay an unusual comfort. I guided Tom into the living room, where I had previously arranged the tea tray with care on the low wooden table. The china shimmered in the gentle light, fragile and weathered in spots, a subtle testament to the passage of time. Tom settled into the chair opposite me, his movements leisurely, almost reflective. The earlier tension appeared to fade, yet an unarticulated energy lingered between us, an enigmatic force that beckoned exploration. I poured the tea deliberately. The gentle sound of liquid filling the cups breaking the stillness. Tom took the cup from my hand, his fingers lingering on mine for a moment longer than needed. I wasn't sure if it was intentional or not, but it sent a strange shiver down my spine. We both sat there, sipping the tea, the quiet stretching between us like an open invitation. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself immerse in the moment to simply exist. I was uncertain about where this might unfold, or if it might unfold anywhere at all, yet there was an unmistakable, correctly express it, concerning his presence here, regarding our shared moments together. I wasn't certain if it was merely the solitude that lingered in the air transformed the distance between us into something profound, or perhaps it was genuinely something more significant. That evening, as we nestled in the gentle illumination of my living room, I sensed a change had occurred in our connection, and I didn't want to hold back from it. Not quite at this moment. The gentle clink of our teacups filled the room, drawing my attention to its rhythm, the porcelain meeting the wood, the delicate steam rising in slow spirals from the tea. Everything about the evening felt as if it were unfolding at your own speed, calmly, free from stress. There was a calmness in the atmosphere, a serene pause that embraced the stillness. It was an unusual sort of tranquility, and for reasons I couldn't articulate, it felt satisfying. Tom appeared at ease, allowing the moments to drift by. His gaze occasionally drifted to the window, where the last of the light was slipping away, leaving behind a cool, almost purple sky. He was reserved, and I found that perfectly acceptable. Indeed, I discovered his stillness to be quite soothing. As if I grasped the essence of silence just as clearly. I lifted my cup for another sip of tea, and my gaze drifted back to him again. His posture intrigued me, the slight hunch of his shoulders, elbows resting on his knees, and hands loosely clasped together suggested an internal struggle. It made me ponder what thoughts or feelings he might be grappling with beneath the surface. I had always thought my neighbors lived uncomplicated, carefree lives, at least from what I could observe from my garden or the rare peek over the fence. However, there was a complexity to Tom that I hadn't recognized before, a subtle melancholy hidden beneath his relaxed exterior. You brought it up before. You tended to keep to yourself a lot. Yet, I said gently, setting my cup down. Is that a deliberate decision? His eyes met mine then, and for the briefest of moments, I saw something flicker behind them, an acknowledgement of sorts. But also a retreat. It was a challenging experience, revealing aspects of ourselves, particularly to someone we were not well acquainted with. In that moment, I found myself unwilling to allow the bond we shared to fade away so effortlessly. Not when I had just begun to grasp that there was more to this encounter than mere. With a sense of neighborly courtesy, Tom shifted in his chair, yet his gaze remained unwavering. Indeed it is. I believe I've grown accustomed to it. Oh, the solitude. His voice was soft, deliberate. It seems that after a considerable amount of time, One begins to understand the extent of what can be accomplished in solitude. It seems simpler, in a sense, more organized. He smiled, yet the warmth never touched his eyes. I nodded, uncertain of how to reply, yet acutely aware of the gravity of his words. I grasped something there. I as well had welcomed the stillness, my sanctuary, my literature, my brew. I could easily lose myself for days without encountering another soul, and it hardly affected me as much as one might expect. The silence enveloped me, offering a peculiar comfort to my tired spirit. Yet I found myself pondering the solitude that lingered just beneath Tom's expressions. The same loneliness that had drawn him to the edge of my garden, hesitating at the threshold sometimes. I said slowly, I wonder if we become so accustomed to solitude that we forget the feeling of allowing someone in. I didn't intend to express that. Indeed, it caught even me off guard. Yet, a warmth enveloped the room, a tender beckoning for truth that Tom hesitated to respond to right away. Instead, he gazed into his cup. The steam from the tea spiraling upward toward the ceiling like a lingering memory. For a brief instant, I felt a pang of concern that I had revealed too much. That I had unlocked a door he wasn't prepared to step through. But then he spoke again, and his voice was softer this time, almost as if he were confiding in himself. Yeah, he said. His gaze still locked on the cup. I believe you have a valid point. Remaining on the periphery is the simpler choice. Perhaps a bit simpler. He hesitated, but I can't quite put my finger on it. There's an intriguing quality to this evening. I never anticipated finding myself in this moment, alongside you. His words lingered in the atmosphere, and I sensed a surge of warmth swell within me. Not from the tea, but from a source far more profound. It wasn't a declaration of anything explicit, nothing that would have disrupted the delicate equilibrium between us. But it was a recognition of the unforeseen, of this untraveled path, that we were both venturing into without completely grasping where it might take us. A genuine smile spread across my face. One that felt gentle and effortless. I didn't expect it either, I said, almost to myself. There was something in the air, something unspoken but palpable, and in that space between us, I could feel the connection solidifying, like a thread being pulled taut between two distant points. I had no need to dissect it, I had no need to label it. It lingered in the room with us, quietly laying its groundwork as we sat in silence a little longer. As I gazed out the window, my mind wandered, taking in the garden enveloped in the gentle glow of twilight. The flowers appeared distinct now, vibrant and full of life, as if the evening had enchanted them into something extraordinary. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was a change occurring within me as well. I think I should go, Adam said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, as if he were expressing regret for something unexpressed. I blinked, taken aback. Already, he nodded, gradually rising from the chair. Indeed, yes. I ought to allow you your space. I appreciate the time you've shared with me. His gaze met mine once more, and there was an intensity in it that caused my heart to skip a beat. It wasn't urgency, but a quiet reluctance, as though he wasn't quite ready to leave, yet knew he had to. I rose with him, my heart suddenly beating a little faster. I couldn't put it into words, yet I felt a strong urge for him to stay. I wished for this moment to linger a little longer. It doesn't have to end, I said, surprising myself with the invitation, the words tumbling out before I had a chance to think about them. You can stay a little longer, remain for just a bit more time. I'm relishing the presence of those around me. Tom's expression softened, and for a long moment, he simply gazed at me. Then, almost subtly, he inclined his head. He remained silent. No words necessary. His consent was evident in the way he lingered, in the subtle shift of energy that flowed between us. He wasn't in a hurry anymore, and I believe I would appreciate that. He said softly, easing back into the chair. His hand reached out for his cup again, and as he took a sip, I couldn't help but notice how his fingers trembled just slightly. Whether it was from the evening's cool air or something deeper, I couldn't say. In that moment, I realized that neither of us was ready to be alone. Not at this moment. The evening transformed, adopting a richer tone as the outside sky deepened, stars starting to emerge like faint echoes from afar, the house had grown even more silent. Except for the gentle clink of our teacups and the occasional whisper of the wind, bringing with it the fragrance of fresh grass and earth through the open window. There was a kind of peaceful tension in the air, a sense that something important was taking place, though neither of us seemed willing to name it yet. Tom had settled back into the chair. His posture more relaxed now, though his eyes still carried the weight of whatever thoughts he moved through the shadows with quiet grace. He had started to articulate his thoughts in disjointed pieces, as if he were attempting to weave a story that remained just out of reach, and I was listening, not merely with my ears, but with that quiet part of myself that had become so familiar with solitary listening, to the rhythms of my own thoughts. "A funny thing," he said after a long pause, swirling the tea in his cup. "How can you be in such proximity to someone for an extended period, yet never truly perceive their essence?" I hesitated, caught off guard and uncertain of my reply. His voice carried a certain ache, and I found myself questioning whether he was speaking of me or regarding himself. "Perhaps it's a bit of both. It seems we all maintain our distance, don't we?" I murmured, nearly to myself. The words seemed to weigh more now, as if they held a deeper truth than I had meant to convey. It's simple to construct barriers around ourselves. At times it seems more secure that way, Tom exhaled. His eyes fixed on the window, yet I noticed the strain in his jaw, and the way his fingers clutched the cup a bit too firmly, indeed. "It's safer," he conceded softly. "But then, you awaken one morning, and it strikes you, the stillness, the space between. And you come to understand that it's no longer about safety. It's merely an emptiness." A quiet calm resonated in his voice that I found impossible to overlook. The type of solitude that hovered just below the surface of it all. I hadn't recognized how deeply I, too, had been evading that same sensation, acting as if my small realm of blossoms and tranquil nights sufficed. Tom's eyes finally turned back to me, and I discovered myself confronting his gaze with an intensity that took me by surprise. I noticed a change in his eyes, a hint of vulnerability, a silent question lingering there. In that instant, I understood, truly understood, that he wasn't merely speaking of his own isolation. He was striving for something greater, something deeply human. "Something shared, you know," I said, my voice steady as I placed my cup down on the table. "Yeah, I don't mind the quiet, but it's changed now. It's not what it once was." Tom's brow furrowed slightly, his lips pressing together as if contemplating the weight of my words. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, searching for a way to articulate the sensation, seeking the right words to express this peculiar new bond forming between us. His gaze held a certain quality, a blend of patience and curiosity, as if he were anticipating the moment I would reveal something that had been hidden for far too long. I believe I began at a leisurely pace, convincing myself for so many years that I was perfectly fine on my own, that I didn't require anything more. But tonight, with you here, as we simply converse, I came to the realization that I had been deceiving myself. I do not. I long for companionship and connection, not in the manner I had anticipated. The words lingered in the air for a long moment, the room feeling both heavier and lighter simultaneously, as if the atmosphere had transformed in a way that made it easier to breathe, yet also rendered it a touch more exposed. Tom sat quietly, his fingers gently wrapped around his cup, and his gaze softened, a subtle yet understanding smile gracing his lips. "You're not alone," he said, his voice soft yet comforting. "Not this evening." His words, though straightforward, struck me in an unexpected way. I felt a warmth flood through me, not the heat of the tea, but something deeper. Something that made my heart feel less like it was closing in on itself, and more like it was opening to something new. "I'm glad," I whispered, unsure if he had intended to say that or if it had simply come from the place where things and words often lived. Regardless, it seemed to mark the start of something delicate and still in the process of revealing itself, yet undeniably tangible. There was no sudden change, no flood of words or feelings. It was not the sort of moment that could be easily categorized. As we lingered in that moment, the evening enveloping us, I sensed the serene understanding that existed between us. There was no requirement for elaborate displays, no necessity for assurance. It was sufficient for time to flow, yet neither of us appeared keen to depart from the moment. In the shadows. In certain respects, we had both been on a quest for this, seeking a realm where silence was not merely an emptiness to occupy, but a sanctuary where connection could flourish effortlessly. As the clock on the wall chimed the hour, I became acutely aware of the passage of time, the lateness of the hour, and I felt a deep hesitation to propose the unavoidable farewell. I wished to preserve this serene tranquility. I didn't want to lose the sense of connection that felt, for once, real, but Tom finally stood up, his movements slower now, as if he, too, wanted to stretch. The instant revealed. I should get going, he said again, but this time there was a calmness in his voice, as if time had momentarily paused. It was merely an unvoiced recognition that the night had unfolded into something more prolonged than we had anticipated. And we both understood that departing signified nothing more than the conclusion of a chapter. I rose too, and we lingered there for a moment, the distance between us transformed, more expansive, more authentic. Neither of us spoke much as I escorted him to the door, yet I could sense the shift. Our steps felt lighter, and the goodbyes held a weight of understanding instead of finality. Tom turned to me as he reached the door, and without contemplating, I moved closer and embraced him. It wasn't something I had anticipated, it simply felt appropriate. As if it were the inevitable ending to the night. The serene connection between two individuals who had subtly and unexpectedly discovered something I had both been searching for. Thank you. Yes, I said softly, pulling back just enough to meet his gaze. For this evening, Tom smiled, and there was a certain quality in his expression. Something that he mentioned that he didn't quite have the words either, but that it signified something deeper than just a simple gesture. No, yes, he replied. Thank you very much for allowing me in. With that, he stepped outside, the night air enveloping him like an old friend. I lingered for a moment, observing him as he made his way down the path. Sensing the heaviness of the night settled into my bones, but this time it felt light. It felt like liberation. As the door clicked shut behind me, I sank back into the tranquility of my home. The evening had come to a close, yet it had also embarked on a new endeavor. The barriers I had meticulously constructed around my being had not shattered, but rather shifted, revealing an unexpected openness. Enough to allow something to draw me in, and for the first time in a long while, I felt prepared to discover where it might guide.